Hello and welcome to the latest FS Tech video interview. I'm editor Michelle Stevens and today I'll be talking about data compliance with Chris Atkinson, a senior solutions architect at MarkLogic. Chris, thank you for joining us today.
Hi, pleasure.
So it seems like we see headlines almost every month about a retail or investment bank being hit with a huge data compliance fine. What implications does the changing regulatory landscape have for banks at the moment?
Well, fundamentally, the banks can go bust if they don't get it right, or it can eradicate all of their profits, and that's what we're seeing. So in many respects, this is driving the banks to adopt new ways of pulling information into a single view within their organizations, and doing that in such a way that it doesn't actually break the bank, that it maintains the individual agility of their lines of business, but also gives them a timely, accurate and complete view of the information that they're aggregating or seeing at a point in time.
So does a retail bank need to approach compliance and regulation in a different way to, say, an investment bank?
In some ways, yes. So the shape of the data that they have to report against can be very different. A retail bank, for example, may be required to answer questions such as provide a particular customer of theirs with all of the information held on them at a single point in time. That could be across mortgages, car loans, a multitude of products. They're retailing, their payments, all sorts of stuff. So from that point of view, there's much less structure to it, and it may cross many, many different lines of business. From an investment perspective, often the amount of reporting that has to be done across different silos may be just as many silos, but the actual shape of the information is much more common. So as a result, the questions are very different. What we see is, from a regulatory perspective, is the variety of the information is much higher in the retail space than would be in the investment space. The investment space is much more data, less variety, and tighter real-time reporting requirement to it. Whereas on the retail side, there's a much slower cadence. You often get several days, in fact, to satisfy those requirements. But the two are equally heavy and difficult to achieve.
And with MiFID II regulations just around the corner, what can banks do to speed up their preparations for compliance, in particular if they feel that they're actually behind the curve at this point?
So we have within MarkLogic, we've got a bit of a track record, in fact, in turning around MiFID II companies companies wanting to meet the MiFID II deadline in a pretty quick fashion and bring them ahead of the curve rather than behind the curve. My advice is pretty straightforward. Aside from the technology choices that you make, you need to develop an iterative approach to identifying and executing your MiFID planning. The business is moving all the time. If you attempt to try and plan and map all of the fields and your sources to your destination output, to your regulatory or regulatory reporting provider, by the time you get there, it'll all have changed. In the development world, a lot of people are familiar with agile technologies. The emphasis on agile is to get started with the minimum amount of documentation and process and build that as you go iteratively and accommodate for changes as you go, because whatever you start with will be very different to what you end with. That's the concept. And that's actually very much what we condone, get our shoulders behind in terms of this. MarkLogic is very good at getting you to not worry about the technology and how you're going to store the information and how you'll aggregate the information. You can instead focus on doing the complex mapping, creating those mappings between what you're going to do and where you go and what you're actually going to provide to the regulator. And by taking the headache of how you store that information away, we can help people actually get to their MiFID II deadlines with confidence.
So what do you think the challenges are in using a relational database when trying to provide real-time reporting for regulations?
So relational works, and it works extremely well, and it's very, very fast. But it's only fast when it's the structures and the information that it's actually querying are in an extremely structured form, because that's how it was designed to work. I often use the analogy, it's like a car. If the relational database is the car, the data is the surface of the road. If the surface of the road is perfectly smooth and uniform, then that car will go extremely fast. If you want to do 200 miles an hour in a sports car, you're going to be able to do that, but you're going to need a nice smooth data surface in order to do it. That is the biggest challenge with relational, which is that surface is less than smooth. There are often challenges with it, and there may be holes in it because of the quality of the upstream sources. And the actual surface itself, because it's coming from different sources, is often not uniform, which slows the whole car down. What you actually need is a solution that allows you to accommodate for the fact that there is different shapes of information, that surface may not be entirely smooth. And if you can do that, if you can select a technology that allows you to effectively take information in which has different data models and maybe even damage data, but still allow you to work in a performant way across that, then that's going to be a way forward. And that's really where relational, in many respects, doesn't satisfy that requirement. It requires you to place all of that information into a structured standard form, and that's very difficult for organisations to do with multiple data sources in order to manage and try and create some kind of canonical model across.
How do you think that data governance fits with compliance?
So governance can be the enemy in some respects of compliance, or compliance can be the enemy of governance, perhaps is a better way of phrasing it. Certainly with MiFID II, we're seeing a lot of this, which is a requirement to pull information into a central location and then report across it. But that violates a lot of jurisdictional requirements. So, for example, information in Luxembourg and Switzerland, the information about the counterparties that is within a trade, for example, may not be permissible to be published outside of those jurisdictions. But you need that information in order to identify what the calculations are that you're running it and provide to the regulator. Often what we find is that you can satisfy those if the security models and the way that you manage the data is done in such a way that it allows you to ensure that that information is only accessible to the processes and the calculations and not to the viewer of the information. The best way of doing this is to pull the information into what I would describe as an operational data store. So you can pull the information in and then secure it in such a way that the calculations can run over the top, but you are either masking the underlying detail that the regulator wants to hide away, if you like, or the jurisdiction requires hide away, but still give you the ability to create accurate calculations. Also, a big advantage of pulling things into a central location, creating the calculations there and storing them there, is that everybody is working from the same information, the same calculation, and that improves data quality. It also guarantees completeness as well. So this is definitely the approach that I would recommend. It satisfies governance and compliance requirements.
Banks are spending a great deal of money on regulatory issues. How can they ensure that they're also innovating to remain competitive at the same time?
Yeah, that's a big one. So actually, it's not so tough. The first thing is there's so much information in all of the siloed information that you're pulling into one location that it holds immense value. The challenge is that normally what you would do is you would break the information up, you would transmit it in what we describe as a sharded form, and then you would recompile it into a new master data model, if you like, inside this repository or warehouse. And at that point, you've lost context, you've lost information because you're not going to be bringing everything across. A much more powerful way of doing this is to take the data in its native form and bring it into that database and store it within its own data model. That data model from the source system exists like that because it's a good way of accessing the information. And if you can layer something on top of that that allows you to search that information within its native data model, then actually you get something that's very, very powerful. How do you do that is a big question. And how do you do that in such a way that the different people that are accessing all of those different data models get to ask the questions that they want? Normally you would build a report, but a report is an artificial layer that breaks the information up again and represents it to the user. A much better way is to, if you can, create a data model that sits on top of it. And within MarkLogic, you can do this by using the RDF technology, the semantics technology, which allows you to effectively create a data model that doesn't affect the original data. It actually allows you to create what we call an ontology, and that then links into the original information, and you can apply multiples of these against the information. So different people can use different ontologies to derive different views of the information at that time. And we have customers doing this, several all over the world, where in fact it's amazing because what they can do is they can ask ask questions and queries of the data, how they used to work. So for, say, historical reasons, they may want to do that way. But the business has moved on to new processing, and they can start using a different ontology to get different answers or improved answers. And that's very, very effective. And I think pretty unique to MarkLogic as well, the ability to store the information in a multimodal database and layer these ontologies on top of it to derive different views of the information in a very informative and easy manner. Very, very powerful stuff.
Great, thank you very much, Chris.
Thank you, pleasure.